My name is Colin Campbell Boussier, and I want to talk to you about teaching students with muscular dystrophy. I want to start by just framing this whole conversation the same way that I did my research paper. So my thesis for the research paper, I said it's imperative that we as a society work to provide the best education possible for people with muscular dystrophy. That means providing education in an inclusive setting in all instances where disabilities allow, and continuously pushing ourselves to expand the accommodations we provide so that opportunity grows, right? So in a second, all of that will make a little bit more sense. Let me just first start off by telling you a little bit about what muscular dystrophy is. First off, it's a really broad term. It includes 9 different neurological disorders. It affects 1.38 people per 10,000. That's big general stuff. Most of this paper, I'm really going to zoom in on DMD, which is the most common form of muscular dystrophy. DMD only, or does not only, but almost exclusively affects males because it's a mutation found on the X chromosome, and males only have one X chromosome. So the impact of that mutation is strengthened because there's with males versus females, where because you have 2 X chromosomes, you have 2 different places to get that same information from, and so the impact of that mutation is mitigated. In all cases, whether we're talking about DMD or muscular dystrophy in general, muscular dystrophy is a progressive disease where the nervous system's communication with muscle groups is progressively deteriorated over the life of the person. And so accordingly, not only is there no cure, not only is it progressive, but it ultimately is terminal because your heart is a muscle and your lungs have little muscles around the bronchioles. And so there have been incredible advances in medicine. So the use of corticosteroids, pulmonary support, such as pacemakers, and cardiac medication, have all had a huge impact on extending the life. So with DMD is unlike other forms of muscular dystrophy, it's discovered at a very early age. As soon as kids are learning to walk, the symptoms start to become apparent, because with all forms of muscular dystrophy, it tends to start in muscle groups in the legs and the arms. But despite that really early onset with DMD, with these new medical supports, people are living into their 30s. Even a couple decades ago, living into your 20s was significant. So as a teacher who's thinking about how do I support a person with muscular dystrophy, I want you to think about how do I prepare this person to become an adult? Because historically, teaching kids with muscular dystrophy did not necessarily mean that, right? All right, so real quick, traits and characteristics. First thing we need to talk about, and this is why my thesis statement was what it was, is there's a debate right now about whether or not intellectual disabilities and learning disabilities are caused by muscular dystrophy, right? In a meta-analysis done by Cotton et al. In 2001, they showed that published mean verbal IQ scores ranged all the way from 62, which is several standard deviations below the normed mean, all the way up to 112, which is almost a standard deviation above the normed mean. The normed mean is 100. this broad spectrum of results published in peer-reviewed literature, uh, I think I think cost, casts a huge shadow of doubt on the validity of that same findings, uh, cumulative VIQ and PIQ, so verbal and performative IQ scores. Um, they in Cotton et al. Found that both VIQ and PIQ, when you when they summed up all of the data from all of the published literature, uh, which included, it was still less than 1,000 individuals, but it was like 800 and something individuals. Uh, they found that when you looked at all the data, uh, that both VIQ and PIQ were about a standard deviation below the mean, causing them to believe that there is a correlation. I think you can say there is a correlation between. Accordingly, I think it is acceptable to say there's a correlation, but I think claiming that we can say that muscular dystrophy is somehow has a causal link with those intellectual learning disabilities, I think is not possible considering the huge range of published means in the literature currently. That variability just casts a shadow of doubt. So, as we move forward and we're thinking about traits and characteristics we associate with muscular dystrophy, I want you to remove thinking about intellectual and learning disabilities. Yes, people with muscular dystrophy may have intellectual disabilities just like anybody else in society, right? Yes, people with muscular dystrophy may have learning disabilities, so just like anybody else in society, right? So we may see those two things happen at the same time, but when you think about muscular dystrophy, you should not be thinking about intellectual and learning disabilities unless that's specific to the learner in front of you. With that said, I want to look at the very bottom of this page, right? Primary causes of problems in academics. We're going to get into a lot more detail in a second, but Wang et al. In 2015, in the study that they did, found that the largest contributing factor to problems in academics was constant illness. The second leading cause was not enough time, right? Not enough time to complete tasks. When we consider those two things first, and then we look at low academic performance, right? Poor reading, writing, mathematics, or memory, right? When we consider those first two things first, I think it's far more likely that those two things are causal than anything else for those reading, writing, and mathematics. And then physical struggles using school materials. Again, we will get in more detail about this in just a second. Common strengths. I want to put academics at the top of the list, right? There have been a lot of studies that have been done. There's a lot of case studies, etc. And it appears that when students with muscular dystrophy are given the resources they need to physically access the education opportunities in front of them, that they rise to the challenge. And accordingly, I think we need to really elevate resilience and perseverance, right? Can you imagine being a kid who has a progressive illness, right? You know that you're going to be able to play less and less of the games you currently play the way you play them currently. And that it's terminal, that you're going to die, and then still choosing to go to school, right? Still choosing to work. I think that is incredibly tough. I think it's incredibly impressive. I don't know that I would have the same grit. And so I think we can lift up resilience and perseverance as common strengths as well, right? Not strengths that they would choose to have, but strengths that their condition has kind of forced upon them. So, academic challenges, three primary ones: slowness in completing of learning tasks, problems with mobility, problems with manipulating teaching and learning materials. There's a lot of other things on here. I just want to really quickly highlight, though, the contrast. That same study I referred to before, Wang et al. From 2015, they did a really interesting thing. This was the most interesting thing I read. They asked students what they thought were the largest barriers to them learning, and then they asked teachers what they thought the largest barrier was to the students' learning. And there's some really unique differences. Again, I'm not going to read through all of them, but I just want to point out a couple, right? So students lifted up, the first two things that students talk about really is just like, please just give us more time to complete things. The third thing they asked for is they are like, we want more comfortable wheelchairs. I thought the last thing, even though it was a smaller group, 11.1% of kids, they were concerned about the gender of the person who was bathing them, right? Like, when you read through what the teachers list off, none of them mention comfortable wheelchairs, none of them mention concerns about the gender of who's bathing kids, right? Firstly, that's just interesting. And I think it speaks to the importance of asking kids what they need, right? It speaks to the importance of teaching communication skills, right? Because kids are going to have insights into what they need that adults are not going to see because they're not in their shoes, right? And then lastly, I just want to point out the teachers asked for additional aides, additional people to be helping out in the classroom, right? This is a great insight by teachers, right? Like, the kids are saying, we need more time, we want to be able to take exams orally. Teachers are saying, cool, I need more people then in order to actually do that, right? So I wasn't trying to diminish what teachers say. I'm a teacher, I think teachers are pretty great, but anyway, both together, right? Together. So, specific strategies. Two really big things, and then a third one that is equally important, right? So, two primary ones. Use of aides. So this either means professional adults, additional adults in the room, or there's one study that I read where they were using student peers, in order to help in the classroom, and they were really successful. So I think that's another great option. And then the second thing is adaptive equipment and resources in the room. So that's everything from your wheelchair and your gait trainer and your walker to tools to help flip the page when reading. And then thirdly, and this is very, very important because muscular dystrophy is a progressive illness, right? Because it is a progressive illness, you need to stay flexible. You need to continuously be paying attention to the changing needs of your students, right? We already said students with muscular dystrophy, because of their condition, they've become really resilient. They're used to things being tough, and they're used to putting their head down and grinding and getting it done anyway. And so, as teachers, it's our responsibility to be continuously vigilant to make sure that all students get equal access to the education that they're entitled to. And yeah, take a second and also read that little bit that I have there at the top. That's also really important, but I don't have time. Okay, notable case, the CDC profiled a young man named Connor, and I think, so I teach high school, and his story is really about his life after high school, but his reflections on his life after high school, I think, are really, really informative um, in terms of like what we need to do um, when in order to prepare kids in high school so that they can become adults, right? The Again, the statistic I want you to remember is that increasingly you have people with DMD who are living into their 30s. Again, a couple decades ago, this wasn't the case. So, Connor's now in college. Um, he's thinking about living independent after college. Um, and this is what he had to say. He said, I decided that eventually I had to manage my own medical care, uh, so I should try to understand it better. Emailing, setting up appointments. People should teach kids how to manage their medical expenses and their living situations after college, and maybe also talk about how you don't always have to be stuck at home. You can be outgoing and do stuff, and you can make a difference if you really try. The thing I want to point out here, right, is things like managing your medical care, right, setting up appointments. These are skills, and these are skills that should be part of the transition plan for students with muscular dystrophy, right? They can be independent, but they're skills that we need to teach, right? How to manage your medical expenses, right? And your living situation, right? How to live with roommates, right? His specific goal is to live with roommates. Maybe somebody else wants to live independently. Maybe somebody else wants to live with their parents, right? It's going to depend student to student. But I think some of those basic things like how to set up appointments, how to use email, how to manage your medications and your medical care, how to manage medical expenses. Those are skills that we can start to teach kids in high school so that if they do choose to be independent, they have that option. The last piece was an action item, right? This was a little activity for you guys to do in respect to the debate about causal links between intellectual disabilities and muscular dystrophy. We don't have time. We're on minute 17. We don't have time to go through this, but I will submit the PowerPoint with it so that you have time to read through this and think about this as well. So, thank you. I appreciate you. Take care.